I just obsess over it, and I obsess over it until I fall asleep, and I dream about it, and then I wake up and I do it again. Building this business is like cocaine to me. I just don't know how to stop. I basically spent 5 years of my life when I was a teenager just obsessively studying YouTube, watching YouTube 10 hours a day, obsessing over it. Like if a video got 40 million views, figuring out why, and doing that just literally tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of times, to the point where, you know, I was basically just kind of a YouTube loser. And this was back when YouTube wasn't cool. No one in my entire school wanted to make content. I had no equipment. My brother had a really old hand-me-down laptop that I just would kind of steal at night. I didn't have a microphone, I didn't have anything, and I had no one to teach me. So it was a long, brutal process from like 11 to basically when I was 19 years old. Things started to take off a little bit, but every comment was like, get better quality, get better audio. You know, I had to just slowly just build up money to buy the equipment. I had to slowly train myself how to edit, to do the camera, be entertaining, make videos people like. I basically got 100,000 subscribers filming on a hand-me-down iPhone. I don't mind talking to a camera, I find that fun. It's actually more difficult for me to talk to people. There were actual points in my life where my family thought I was mute, which later on in life I learned it's because I couldn't find people I related to, and no one around me was obsessed over business and content and the things I was obsessed over. I just didn't know how to speak normal teenager language when I was a teenager. I just couldn't figure it out. It was crippling boring. And my brain would just be like, this is mind-numbing. I want to figure out how we become successful and build a business and stuff like that. I thought I was just like a fucking loser that would never be able to talk to anyone and never know how to speak to anyone. But really, I just learned that there's just certain people that I get along well with, and it's just a very small section of the human population. But when I'm around those people, life is amazing. The beauty of YouTube, which I think does it better than anyone else, is the algorithm is so refined where your YouTube account is just what YouTube thinks you'll watch, which is very accurate. You don't even really study the algorithm anymore. You just kind of study what do people want to watch. If you want to get 100 million views on a video, you don't go, how can I trick YouTube to serving this to 100 million people? It's just not going to happen. You just think, how do I make something that 100 million people will want to watch? And then YouTube will give it to them with the data tells them that 100 million people want to watch it. If I see an idea, I can just tell, like, yes, 100 million people would want to watch that. Or no, like that's more like something that's a little more niche, but it would kill that niche, but that's probably like 10 million views or 20, you know what I mean? We work on videos probably 3 to 4 months in advance. So from start to when they get uploaded, it's probably like 1 to 2 months coming up with the idea, 3 to 4 months working on the idea, and then a couple weeks filming, and then like 3 weeks editing. So probably 5 months from start to finish. 2 years ago, we were spending 100 grand a video. Now we're spending probably 1.5 million a video. For me, it comes pretty easily. It's just, if I don't think the video is great, just don't upload it. I mean, 'cause it's the beauty of not really doing things for money. Like, if I don't think the audience will like it, it's gone. I just don't need a mansion to be happy. I don't need a supercar to be happy. I don't really need anything outside of this. You know, as long as I have a bed and a bathroom, I'm fine. Because of that, I don't have any liabilities outside of the company, so I can just reinvest it all. Because like, I don't have to have the fear of, well, if things don't work out, I can't maintain my crazy lifestyle, or my down payment each month's like 50 grand on my 5 supercars and $100,000 on this giant mansion and insurance and all this other stuff, and I have to maintain 30 maids or whatever it is, you know, the crazy stuff people end up getting into. So to me, money is just fuel to grow the business and help people, and not much else. Beast Burger we launched during COVID, and so this is when restaurants were shutting down left and right. There's lockdowns, like everyone was switching over to delivery. The big driver was we really wanted to just help a lot of restaurants generate extra revenue, because you know, by the time they take home their pay and the delivery apps take their fee and everything, it's not like the profit margins are that great on it. It's more to help other people. Like I haven't taken a single dollar out of it. We just reinvested all over there. With Beast Burger, that's why I'm really trying to figure out how we can get more people eating something like Impossible Meat, or right now we're looking heavily into lab-grown meat and stuff like that. I would personally love to switch over to one of these soon, if we just, but I don't want it to just switch over and then we don't sell any and then it does no good. It's gonna be like Feastables, where people are actually buying it, so it actually makes a change. One thing I noticed is, you know, I could go stand in any Walmart in America and random people come up and ask for a photo, or I could go stand in Target or a gas station, anywhere. It just kind of clicked once we started putting these in retail. Those same people that if I stand there will ask for a photo, they'll also buy our product. I wanted to just make a better for you snack brand because I think a lot of the stuff out there is just terrible for you. Like for cereal, one of the products I want to do next, right? Like you have the Lucky Charms that are like $2.50 a box, and I mean, God knows how many ingredients are in a box of Lucky Charms. But then you have stuff like Magic Spoon, which is, you know, infinitely better for you and good. Like it's not going to kill you to eat, but it's also like really, really expensive, you know? And so like this is like a perfect example where I want to live in the middle and help bring that high quality, low ingredients, good for you down to more like a $4 or $5 price range and put my brand behind it so people eat it. And if they do that, then I can sleep well at night because it's a net positive. A lot of people still see YouTubers as kind of like a subclass of influencers, or they still just don't truly understand the influence a lot of creators have. In the last 90 days, we've had 300 million unique people watch our videos. That's a lot, and on average for like 40 minutes each. And that's just on YouTube. I mean, if you factor in TikTok and everything else, it's probably closer to 400, 450 million unique people. Our revenue has gone up every single year the last 10 years. My investment is the content here, and any money I take out is usually just to free up time so I can make more content. Not at the point yet, but I kind of literally want to just sell everything I own, minus like a bed, and like just put everything on the bed that I own and just live off of that. I think so many people just are so materialistic, and that's just what they chase, and I really don't want that lifestyle. When you die, why does it matter? You know what I mean? All this like materialistic stuff. I really just want to focus on building the business and helping people, because I feel like that's more what matters in life. You know what I mean?
The inefficiencies in supply chain are back pressure holding back all the other world's industries. Every industry depends on it. Employment, jobs, prosperity is really held back by a rotten or at least dilapidated infrastructure for global logistics. Flexport's one of the most important companies out there trying to improve this, trying to almost like do open heart surgery on the world's circulatory system of the economy.
A company that's been on my radar for a few years is called Flexport. Flexport came from Y Combinator and is backed by a lot of the leading figures in Silicon Valley, but it's challenging a very ancient and sometimes backwards industry in the shipping world. So Flexport is a freight forwarder, which means that it doesn't own ships or planes or trains, but it does help its customers book space on all those vessels to get things from the factory to the warehouse or the store. It also does a lot of other things like customs, insurance, financing, everything kind of in that logistics chain, getting something from point A to point B for the consumer like us. What's interesting to me about Flexport is that its CEO last year really became sort of the face of the supply chain problem and solutions to try to fix it. Not as much was being said about his business. How big is Flexport? Is Flexport a good business? What do people think about it? And what does the existing industry think of this Silicon Valley startup that has moved in and is saying we can do things better and faster? Ryan Peterson actually got his start importing and exporting random goods from China to Arizona, where he was working with his big brother.
So I was buying products in China mostly, but all over the world, buying motorsports products. We imported these products, my brother and I and another friend of ours, and sold them through the internet. So we were sort of e-commerce entrepreneurs, but also importers. I felt that we were really suffering at the hands of the world's freight forwarders. Nobody could tell me where my stuff was, how much it was going to cost, what all these confusing regulations were, the paperwork. I felt like I was getting ripped off. And after a number of years of doing some other things, I built a business selling data on imports and exports as well. I finally came back to this problem of like, where's the technology platform that makes it easy to do global trade? And that was now 8 years ago. It's been 8 years since I started Flexport.
In January, I visited the port of Oakland with Ryan Peterson to watch a ship get loaded up with containers heading back to Asia. It was a slow process where you could really see the areas where innovation would make sense. But for Peterson, this is all beautiful.
I argue often that I think no technology in the 20th century lifted more people out of poverty than the shipping container. We reduced the price of shipping by 95, maybe even 99% in some places. And that's had a tremendous upward benefit for all of humanity. It's cheaper to buy things, it's easier to find customers all over the world, businesses can go global. So it's been very powerful. But we also haven't seen a lot of progress. I mean, the shipping container was invented in the 1960s. We're still loading them one at a time. It's pretty manual operation. I'd love to see real innovation here where you could increase the throughput of these ports and bring machine learning into bear on, finding the right container at the right moment so that drivers don't have to wait for hours at the port gate. There's a lot of opportunity still for technology here in this industry.
Shipping is obviously one of the oldest trades in the world. It's been around for thousands of years. And in recent times, shipping has been known as sort of a family business or a business that is not one of a lot of innovation. It's one of relationships. Not exactly the most technologically savvy historically group.
I assume that big companies had sort of like advanced systems and AI and all these things. And it was only after we got started that big companies started signing up and coming to us to talk to us. And did we realize that, in fact, even the biggest companies in the world are running these sophisticated supply chains by emailing Microsoft Excel attachments and PDFs and making phone calls. And they really had a need for the kinds of technology that we build. What you need to understand about global freight forwarding is, I sometimes joke it should be called global freight email forwarding. To move one container of goods from, let's say, a factory in Vietnam to a warehouse in the middle of the United States, you'll actually have as many as 10 or 12 companies and sometimes more play a role. From the factory itself, the importer, the warehouse, trucking companies in both countries, ports, customs brokerages who clear the goods through the government agencies, ocean carriers, an insurance company, a bank. It's a complex coordination problem. And what Flexport has done differently is build interfaces, build software, whether that's a web interface, mobile app, and increasingly it's about APIs where software can talk to software to connect all these parties and get them the data they need or get us the data we need from them and make trade seamless. So that cuts costs.
In the 2000s, shipping hit historic lows that forced these ocean carriers who've been around for a long time to rethink their business. So you have a lot of people thinking, how can we improve getting things onto the ship so that ships aren't running half empty, people are actually getting their stuff on time, even if the margins and the dollars here are not very big. That's actually great for a company like Flexport, which was able to come into the market and say, hey, we don't care exactly which ship or exactly which customer we're using, but we're going to make sure that somebody is going to have something to load and somebody's going to pay for that freight to go across the ocean. And that's really what these carriers needed. In July 2020, something crazy happens. Everyone starts buying stuff again. And whether it's furniture for your house or it's a new home office or it's at-home fitness equipment, and that's when suddenly prices go back up and it's really hard to ship things on time. This is a crisis that the shipping industry continues to deal with today, is really high prices to ship freight. A container that might have cost $1,800 to ship across the Pacific a couple years ago now can cost $18,000.
It's a pretty tough moment to operate in our industry. I mean, on the one hand, it's nice people are finally taking notice and appreciating the fact that container shipping is a vital part of the world's economic infrastructure and not taking it for granted. But prices are way up and performance is way down. Most ships are late right now. A lot of transit time failures. The pandemic's really taken a toll on the industry, so customers are upset. And it's never fun to work in a business where your customers aren't super happy with how things are going.
I think it's important to consider Flexport also by its global impact. Flexport.org has shipped tens of millions of units of PPE during the pandemic.
50% of the world's air freight flies in the belly of passenger planes. And those were all grounded because of the pandemic. And that's how we called United Airlines, Delta, and a few other airlines. Condor was one of the big ones in Europe, and got them to give us, in some cases we paid for it, in some cases they donated. And we just stuffed all these masks in here. And then once we started doing this work, we became kind of a center of gravity, and all these other hospital networks started coming to us. It turned out they'd never imported anything before. I don't think we took a breath for like 3 months, where it was just like, wow, this is 18-hour days every day. It was great because often we feel like we know we're having important impact in the world, but it's not that obvious. Like sometimes you're just shipping a cardboard box, and now it's like, hey, we're saving lives right now. we can ship anything anywhere. Feels like a superpower sometimes.
If you can help the supply chain in some small way, we're talking multiple trillions of dollars of innovation that are there for the taking. And I think it's the scope, the scale of this that is maybe hard for people to appreciate. It's the kind of challenge for someone who wants to have real global impact.
You don't have an option to be scrappy or innovative. You have to, otherwise you don't have a chance to be successful. My name is Ronak Nirmal. I'm the CEO of AccuCo. I'm 29 years old. So at AccuCo, we work with third-party e-commerce sellers. Most of these guys are mom and pop shops. And what we do is we go out and acquire their brands, allow them to participate in the growth of their brand alongside us, and let them have an opportunity to exit. I'm a first-generation Sikh American. I immigrated with my family from India at the age of 7. What was really interesting is that my parents didn't want to take any money from their parents. They wanted to come here and truly, build their own future. And I wanted to follow in their footsteps and do the same. So at the age of 14, I started my first online company. I was able to actually generate enough money to pay for my college tuition as well as my apartment in college as well. My first job out of college was actually at Amazon. I started out as a business analyst. But what was really interesting was what I was really able to achieve there. My boss told me, why don't you go out and start a brand on Amazon, see how well that does, learn, the difficult points that sellers have with e-commerce and the tools that we can help build to empower sellers to be successful on our platform. I did so over the next 6 months, after which I actually left Amazon to pursue selling on Amazon full time because that brand that I'd started, we sold over $7 million in our first year. So really have been, in this space for 7 years, have been living and breathing Amazon. And rather than going out and building our brands from the ground up or consulting for some of the largest sellers, why not take all that knowledge and expertise and then go out and buy some of the best brands that exist and help grow those to the next level? You have to work hard for everything and earn it yourself, whether that's building something from the ground up or working with and getting the most talented people that you can to work with you to build something. Things aren't going to get handed down to you. You have to be the one that does it, and just, focusing on that has allowed me to succeed.
There's no easy explanation why generic drugs, which cost pennies to make, are sold with a markup of more than 1,000%. One of the prime suspects is pharmacy benefits managers, the middlemen who negotiate with drug manufacturers and pharmacies on behalf of insurance companies. But everyone involved seems to take a cut along the way, with a convoluted mix of inflated prices, secret rebates, and discounts. Mark Cuban, who's worth an estimated $4.5 billion, has had enough. It's ridiculous what the pricing for generic drugs is, Cuban said. And just like that, Cuban is taking on these absurd markups, opening an online pharmacy where patients can buy generic drugs with low and transparent prices. The idea for the Mark Cuban Cost Plus Drugs company grew out of one of the most notorious pricing scandals of the last decade. As CEO of Turing Pharmaceuticals, Martin Shkreli raised the price of the decades-old antiparasitic Daraprim from $13.50 a tablet to $750. That whole fiasco, compounded by skyrocketing costs of generic drugs, led one physician, Dr. Alexander Oshmyansky, to cold email Mark Cuban with an idea for a low-cost generic drug company. Cuban is best known as a shark and owner of the Mavericks, but he's also a passionate investor in the healthcare space. Also disgusted with the absurdly high markup of drugs and lack of transparency, Cuban was intrigued by the email. They quickly and quietly started working together last January to hash out the idea. It would feature Dr. Oshmyansky at the helm as CEO, and Cuban investing an undisclosed amount of money and shaping the strategic direction of the company. The mission? To produce low-cost versions of high-cost generic drugs. The business plan? Supply chain transparency. They purchase drugs directly from manufacturers at a 15% markup and a $3 pharmacist fee and bypass the middleman to lower the price of more than 100 medications. The Mark Cuban Cost Plus Drugs company doesn't accept insurance, and it seems like a no-brainer for people who are uninsured or on a high-deductible healthcare plan. But the fact of the matter is that even someone who has decent insurance might be overpaying for some drugs. This is the same reason why the pharmacy coupon company GoodRx has become so popular, because it adds transparency into what is an otherwise incredibly opaque system. A 30-count supply of the asthma medication Montelukast, the generic for Singulair, retails for around $169. The cost plus price? $6. A 30-count supply of blood pressure medication losartan, generic Cozar, averages around $40. The cost plus price, $4.50. A 30-count supply of blood thinner clopidogrel, generic Plavix, averages around $60. The cost plus price, $5.70. The company has partnered with online pharmacy TruePill for mail order delivery, and it is currently building a 22,000 square foot facility in Dallas, where it will manufacture its own medicines.
Chipper is a all-inclusive financial platform that really is aimed at being intertwined in the fabrics of people's financial lives living in Africa. It includes being able to send peer-to-peer payments across borders, being able to invest in assets like crypto or US fractional stocks, being able to use Visa cards on online payments, as well as interact with businesses via our API and B2B suite of products.
Ghana, Nigeria, Uganda, Rwanda, South Africa, and we also live in the US and the UK. Nigeria, Uganda are two of our biggest markets, but all the markets are growing very, very quickly.
I think it was born out of both of our experiences growing up in Africa. I'm born and raised in Uganda, and Majid is born and raised in Ghana, and we met in college. And one thing that really brought us together was this idea that we've grown up seeing firsthand many problems people face living in Africa, and one of the biggest, most prevalent one to us was sending money and how difficult that was.
You see how easy it is to Venmo someone money, but then it's literally impossible to send money from Ghana to Uganda. The cost of doing it is more than the amount that you want to send. And so we started specifically with these, we would solve an intra-African payments. We started in Uganda and Ghana, expanded to Nigeria, Kenya, Rwanda, and that's where the biggest value is. And now we're expanding to the US and the UK because of the same cost. When I moved to the US as a student, my dad had to figure out how to send me money from Ghana to the US, and that was just a ridiculous process. It involved like informal people sending back and forth. But with Chipper, it's significantly easier. You can move very low value instantly and almost for free.
You have some countries that are predominantly mobile money based or mobile money centric financial services like Uganda, Kenya. A lot of East Africa has gone quite far with mobile money. And then in West Africa, I think bank accounts are more prevalent, and that's the predominant financial instrument for most people. And then there's still a very large number of people who still don't have access to any of those solutions. So typically referred to as unbanked or underbanked. And you sort of factor that in with the fact that there's 54 different currencies in Africa. So there is a cross-currency issue as well. Irrespective of if you had the right infrastructure to support money moving, you have to handle the illiquidity of those currencies and a multitude of other issues, but those are sort of the big ones. So you sort of put that together, it creates a situation where it's very hard and expensive to move money from one system in one country to another. Solving the problem required kind of solving all those pieces separately, and hence that's kind of what made it difficult. And to this day, I think it's still very difficult, and there's still a long way to go in solving each of those pieces.
When we met at Grinnell, there was a instant realization that we both wanted to do something, for our home base, for our home continent. I mean, we both wanted to solve a really hard problem. So one of the, apps that we worked on while at school was Voice, which was a voice messaging app that you send a voice message and self-destructs upon receipt. It was a fun project, but it got our bond and it got us started working together. And then over time, we've been in touch and eventually came up with Chipper.
We're definitely naive in the beginning, and I think the first time I tried to raise money, we tried to do it with just a deck before we had built a product. But it was a very nice deck, and we thought that this could get us, a couple $1 million. And we had a very early reality check. And I think one of the things that became very clear very early on is that this is going to be very difficult, and we have to figure out ways to get out of the gate before we get money. So we had to be creative about how we spent our resources. And also how we tailored our message to different audiences. In the early days, I thought that if I sort of focused mostly on African investors, that would be an easier path, and actually end up being a more difficult path. And then I focused more on Silicon Valley-based investors, and that eventually, with some traction, had a bit more success. But in the very beginning, that was a very tough process trying to attract capital. We've raised a tremendous amount of money, hundreds of millions of dollars so far. And that's an immense responsibility that people entrust us with such significant amounts of money to invest and use in a manner that we see fit. And I think it's good to have some pressure. I think it sort of keeps you on your toes. It reminds you of the importance of what you're doing. Not that you forget, but it's just that additional reminder to be that much more diligent, that much more thoughtful.
The opportunity is getting clearer and clearer. Africa is the last frontier. The demographic is incredibly young. People are getting much more tech-enabled, and smartphones are on the rise. And so people are realizing, like, you could begin a service and you could own the space and you could grow this content for the next decade and beyond. And that data comes to life, which previously it wasn't. But as it starts to come out to life, it's going to attract more talent, more resources, and I think it's going to be exciting. There are 1.3 billion people, and there's just a lot of problems that need to be solved.
My name is Tyler Winklevoss. I am the CEO and co-founder of Gemini. Hi, I'm Cameron Winklevoss. I'm the president and co-founder of Gemini, and Tyler was kind enough to hire me a few years ago. Gemini is a crypto exchange and custodian, but really it's a platform building a bridge to the future of money. And our mission really is to empower the individual through crypto. And so we wanted to make it simple and easy and reliable for people to engage in this magical new frontier. And a lot of this was informed by our own experience early on. We bought a lot of crypto on Mt. Gox, which famously imploded. It was a very scary proposition. And we thought for this to go mainstream, for this technology revolution to really happen, we have to build reliable, safe, trusted infrastructure. So that led us to starting Gemini. And it started with building a bridge into the future of money, and then into the future of DeFi, or decentralized finance, and more recently, a bridge into the future of art. My parents aren't art collectors, so there's not like all this art on the walls. Our artistic exposure was probably through film, going to museums, stuff we learned in school, but it's not a classically like art collecting type experience. There's obviously a lot of business, math, science, because our dad's actually an entrepreneur, and we joke that we grew up in a startup. So a lot of the things that come natural to us, like this risk taking and thinking really big, comes very natural because we saw that example firsthand, and we grew up in it. We grew up hanging out at his company, talking to engineers, and actually reading magazines like Forbes with a lot of our idols like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs on it. A lot of our experience was like a lot of other kids growing up collecting baseball cards, comic books. So the collectivity of creative things was there. And that really informed our journey with Nifty Gateway and NFTs. In terms of a fine artist in the offline or meat space world, I've been really fascinated by Kusama's works, especially the earlier nets. But we're very early in our learning process of the fine art world. So I think we're noobs, but I think that's also because we're beginners, that's an advantage of how we aren't encumbered by the assumptions of the the legacy art world. So when we're looking at things like Nifty Gateway, we say, why not? I find, the classic blue chips like Warhol in the modern art world really pleasing. And I also find Kusama and her story, quite frankly, is really fascinating. She was a female artist in New York during the 60s and really wasn't taken seriously for many, many years, if not decades in her career. And she had to overcome a lot, including mental health and the fact that she was a female artist in a very male-dominant world. And so I find her work really compelling. It's kind of a lot in line also with the story of crypto in Bitcoin. It's such an underdog story. I think very few people, well, most people write it off or wrote it off when they first saw it. And very few people were believers who actually imagined where this could go. So I think there's a lot of parallels there to the story of Bitcoin, the story of crypto, and even the story of NFTs. what we identify with is this idea that you're crazy, and nobody really, it's that quote that people often attribute to Gandhi. First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. And quite frankly, we've been crazy a lot in the past, 2 decades or so. And so I think we identify with that frontierism, like being really far out there, where it's sort of this secret hiding in plain sight, if you will. And I think the challenges we've taken up in our lives, everybody has to be an underdog. If you're trying to climb Mount Everest, there's no such thing as an overdog. And rowing and trying to make the Olympics, everybody's an underdog. Bitcoin was the ultimate underdog story in crypto. So I think we take on these challenges where often we do identify with the underdog because of what it takes to succeed and the very low probability of success and the amount of conviction and perseverance necessary to actually, get there. So space is the ultimate frontier. And I think what makes a good astronaut is perseverance and conviction, and a lot of the values that we value as a team at Gemini. And we actually call our employees astronauts. We're all astronauts. Building on the frontier of money and the frontier of art and the frontier of finance. So we really wanted to sort of channel our values and that idea. And we refer to the office as the Gemini spaceship. Space has been a huge motif for crypto. To the moon, right, is a famous meme. And like Cameron said, we feel like we're on a spaceship exploring a new frontier like space. So we call this a Gemini spaceship. We want it to feel like that. We took inspiration from a lot of different things, but we have a storybook from Space Odyssey 2001, the famous movie. So we're just trying to evoke that feeling of, hey, we're on the frontier. We're explorers. When you step into this office, like it's a mentality. Yeah, and we believe in frontiers and we like them because we think that's where greater choice, independence, and opportunity exist. NFTs are non-fungible tokens. They're one of a kind. Very similar to your baseball cards. There's only so many printed, but the scarcity of them, what enforces the fact that it's one of a kind is the cryptography and the math of the blockchain, the same math and technology that enforces there will only be 21 million Bitcoin created. So when an artist mints an NFT and creates only one of them or 10 of them, that's enforced by the same blockchain technology and cryptocurrency that enforces that there will only be so many Bitcoin. Bitcoin created this concept of digital scarcity, of ones and zeros, where you could make something precious or scarce like gold. There's only so much Bitcoin, it's actually fixed, which is a crazy concept because ones and zeros are absolutely plentiful. Bitcoin solved that problem. You can take that to stocks, you can take that to other assets, you can ultimately take it to art. And what makes a Hank Aaron or a Babe Ruth card interesting is there's not that many of them. Art should be digital. We think that NFTs solve the digital scarcity problem. And quite frankly, as we move more and more closer to the metaverse, you'll want art in your online world. And I think that people already play a lot of video games where they're buying goods and services inside the games, but they can't really take them out of that walled garden universe. And we think that NFTs are really exciting because they allow you to basically take art and collect it and move it around the metaverse. The metaverse is basically the recreation of the offline world in the online setting. I think a good example of the metaverse would be Fortnite, where kids basically sign in, or even adults really, people have signed in and they even have held electronic music concerts. I think Marshmello hosted a concert in Fortnite. People signed in to go see him play in this virtual world. Not in an offline setting or a concert venue. And so that's sort of one example of a metaverse, but it is a closed, world currently. And we think in the future, those worlds open up. Collecting art is a core human behavior. It's very, very core to our being. And so having art that moves in the metaverse similar to how Bitcoin is money that moves through the internet, makes a lot of sense to us. We let our curiosity drive us and sort of lead us. So we follow our curiosity, we follow our passion. So we were curious about Bitcoin, we learned, became passionate about it. Then we saw Ethereum and other cryptocurrencies. We learned about NFTs, and we just, we let ourselves go and explore with a really open mind. One of Gemini's values is beginner's mind. We always want to be beginners and not bring our previous assumptions. We were not financial experts when we came to Bitcoin, and that was an asset because we saw the possibilities. And the same thing when we saw Ethereum and other cryptocurrencies and NFTs, the beginner's mind has served us very well and allows us, gives us the freedom to imagine what could be, not always looking in the past. We really like our current mission and journey, and we feel like it has this really unique opportunity to do well and do good. And we really believe in the promise of crypto and the empowerment of the individual and really the greater choice, independence, and opportunity we think it can bring. So we're super excited about the current mission. Yeah, I don't think I'd change anything. I think we'd be busy right now figuring out how to disrupt ourselves, because the idea of a centralized social network is just not going to exist 5 or 10 years in the future. So we're glad to be building in the decentralized frontier of crypto as opposed to trying to change our stripes and get into it now.
The mortgage business is a very old business. It's not something that like young people get into. So for me, when I looked at this business, I thought a lot about, hey, what is the actual execution model that we need to have in order to build a long-term business in a way that is very sustainable? I'm Andrew Wang. I'm the CEO of Valen Technologies, and I am 29 years old. Valen is a mortgage servicing technology company. We're trying to champion homeowners and make sure that they have a trusted brand that they can work with. It's a very complicated process today, and what we're trying to do is simplify it. I actually came from the investment side of the world, so I was looking for a company that I could work with and I felt really treated borrowers the right way, as well as treated me as a client of theirs the right way. Because today the way it works is that a mortgage portfolio owner actually has to go contract with a mortgage servicing company in order to get their mortgages serviced. So what ended up happening is as I looked at these companies more and more, I realized that none of them actually cared about the underlying consumers, which really got me first looking to find a company to invest in, but I couldn't find anyone who really wanted to take this mission and this endeavor, which is why I decided to build this company. It's actually a very difficult space in general to get started in terms of a business because it's highly, highly regulated. There were 2 large phases of difficulties that we ran into. The first phase was actually convincing investors that this was a doable thing because you have to do a lot of R&D, you have to understand all these regulations. And regulations in this space specifically is across 50 states. So you have to understand the laws of 50 states as well as the federal regulations as well as what's called agency regulations. Part 2 of it was actually getting business from enterprises. Right? Because again, it's a really regulated space. Usually they'll say, hey, why don't you just work with so-and-so large company? At least they are someone who's been around in the space. So getting past that and getting to a place where we now are able to service large quantums of mortgages as well as work with multiple institutional partners, that took a lot of convincing, a lot of really getting people to buy into the concept and the long-term viability of the solution.
I'm an engineer by background and came to Stanford for business school where I met Sam. Became friends, started chatting about different ideas, what we might do after business school. And yeah, we hatched the idea of actually starting a solar installation business. At the time focused on emerging markets where energy is a big issue in terms of access, reliability and cost. And so we thought solar would be a great solution for that. During our summer of business school, we put together this pilot project, which was a boarding school in Nairobi, Kenya. Did the whole thing soup to nuts, found the project, designed it, sourced suppliers, financed the system, flew down there and installed it. The system was a great success, but we also realized how cumbersome the whole process was of going solar, of designing solar.
We were meeting nights and weekends out of our dorm rooms in Palo Alto, trying to design the optimal solar installation for a site halfway across the world. And part of the challenges there were, first of all, it was our first time doing anything of this scale. Second of all, we weren't on site. We had to hire people locally to go and take a bunch of measurements for us, take a bunch of photographs, and we'd get all that information back to our dorm rooms after our classes were done, and then try and put together a solar installation that would work. It did take us essentially a year to do something that we thought should be much easier, much faster, and is something that a lot of other people go through. If you look at any solar professional, there are essentially 3 key things that they need to do in order to come up with a solar installation for a property. The first thing they need to do is be able to figure out how many solar panels will fit on the property. The second thing they need to do is forecast how much energy those solar panels will produce. And the third thing they need to do is figure out how much money that will save the customer. What Aurora does is it streamlines the entire process of answering those 3 questions.
When we were reviewing companies for this year's AI 50 list, Aurora Solar jumped out because it was one of the most interesting applications of AI technology. Typically, we see AI being used for lots of things like self-driving cars, a whole range of office and business services, cybersecurity, things like that. But what Aurora Solar is doing is a little bit unique, where they are using these advantages that you can get from advanced AI to custom design solar power systems that on rooftops that might ordinarily be a little too difficult to put solar on.
The process of designing an optimal solar installation and doing that in an efficient, timely manner is actually really difficult. There's many different steps you have to run through, many things you can optimize, right? Like where you place the panels, depending on the roof geometry, depending on the shading there might be from a tree or so forth, different design configurations. And so machine learning and the optimization tools that we developed allows us to automate the entire process of designing a solar installation. It wasn't easy in the early days. Back when we started, it was just, we came out of the wake of the first clean tech boom. A lot of people had lost a lot of money investing in technologies that didn't work out. And so solar was not a hot thing back then.
The first 5 years of the company's life, we basically grew the company on what is a very relatively small amount in funding for a company based out of Silicon Valley. But then within the last 3 years, we've had a tremendous amount of traction.
It's raised more than $500 million, including a $200 million funding round announced in early 2022. And presently, it's valued at $4.4 billion, according to a PitchBook estimate.
Wind and solar together are going to be almost half of our energy mix by 2050. And so it's an incredible transformation that's happening. And so it was clear to us, like, to get from where we were then and even where we are today to that future, there needed to be a streamlined process and a data-driven way of designing and installing and deploying these solar installations at scale.
I would say that the one metric we've always tracked, this is from before we had any customers and when we were just first building the product and continues to be true till today, was the number of projects, that is addresses, that our software is being used to design solar for, right? And I still remember the big milestone of the point where we got to 1,000 addresses a week, right? We couldn't believe, it was like, this is amazing. 1,000 addresses a week are going through our software and being designed by it. More recently, it's 100,000 a week, and we want to get to the point where it's 100,000 per day. So those are the milestones that keep us going. And yes, the funding, valuation, all those things enable us to get there, but that's ultimately the real goal that we're going for.
California is moving ahead with its long-planned high-speed rail project that one day may connect San Francisco to Los Angeles. That's not going to happen anytime soon, but the project has received enough funding to start work and complete the Central Valley portion that runs through the agricultural heartland of the Golden State. In 2008, California voters approved a $10 billion bond measure to provide the initial funding to build the first high-speed rail system in the United States. At that time, the project was estimated to cost about $40 billion. That cost has ballooned dramatically. To complete the entire section between San Francisco down to LA, with stops in San Jose and other major cities in California, the expectation is it's going to run about $105 billion, and that cost could still increase. Currently, the program does have funding to complete 171 miles, a portion through the Central Valley of California. It's not heavily populated, and it's one of the easier sections to build through, and even that has been a very difficult challenge to get going. Already, about 119 miles are under construction, running through cities including Fresno, Bakersfield, and eventually connecting up to Merced in the north. However, to really make the system meaningful, it's going to have those connections into the San Francisco Bay Area and down into Los Angeles in Southern California. So far, the state of California has provided more than $9 billion for the project. Additionally, the federal bipartisan infrastructure law does provide some additional funding for the program, so between $2 and $3 billion are likely to flow into the project to help get that Central Valley portion completed. In total, the expectation is building just that first 171 miles will run between $23 and $25 billion. Many of those costs also include securing some of the last remaining sections of land needed in the Central Valley. However, an additional $80 billion is likely to be needed to do the much more difficult work of getting to San Francisco and Los Angeles, because the system's going to have to bore through major mountain ranges, including the Tehachapi and San Gabriel Range in Southern California. And it will also have to contend with earthquake fault lines that ring the state of California, including the San Andreas Fault. These are not insurmountable engineering challenges. They've been conquered in places like Japan, which is equally mountainous and also highly prone to earthquakes. But it does add a lot of cost. So it's very unclear at this point exactly where all of that additional money is going to come from and what the timeline is to complete the entire system. The United States is a bit of a laggard when it comes to high-speed rail. America does have passenger rail in the form of Amtrak and some commuter lines, but compared to Japan, China, most of Europe, and a lot of other parts of the world, high-speed rail is really not a factor here just yet. We are a car-based country. In part, that's because the United States is so very large. So cars and airplanes tend to be a bit more practical in most cases. But there is a movement that is building to add a lot more high-speed rail in the United States. These are incredibly expensive projects to do. Money is not readily available, and they also take a very, very long time to plan out and do the actual construction work. Proponents of the California system see an opportunity to connect all of the California cities, including those in the Central Valley that were bypassed by the state's Interstate 5 freeway, the main connector between Southern California and the Bay Area. Travel time between Los Angeles to San Francisco when the system's completed could be under 3 hours, compared with 5 to 7 to 8 hours by car currently. Ridership figures are estimated to be about 50 million passengers annually by 2040, which could generate more than $3 billion of fare revenue. Currently, funding for the system to build it is coming from California's Cap and Trade program, which is generating about $1 billion that flows into the California High-Speed Rail Project's annual budget. How long those funds will be available isn't entirely clear. The project does have funding for the time being, but the big question is whether it can ultimately find all of that additional money that it's going to need to achieve those big ridership numbers that are anticipated. One of the benefits that proponents also see is it will really connect the state of California in a way that it's not connected today. One could live in Fresno or Bakersfield and commute to work in Los Angeles or up into Silicon Valley. Housing prices are astronomical in Southern and Northern California, much more reasonable in the Central Valley. So it's a way in which it might make it easier for people to live in California a bit more affordably. What we're seeing right now is a little bit of optimism for the system. There's been a lot of pessimism over the last few years because of cost overruns and the reality of how long this project is going to take to complete. The fact that it's now able to move forward with this first section does provide some optimism that this might actually happen. There's been a lot of doubt that it would. However, best case scenario, the system won't be fully operational until the late 2030s. That first section in the Central Valley should begin operating by about 2030, approximately 8 years from now. However, that's a lightly populated section of California. Ridership numbers aren't expected to be terribly high in those early years. Not until it connects into San Jose, San Francisco, and Los Angeles in the south will California begin to see really meaningful ridership numbers. But again, everything hinges on finding tens of billions of dollars that currently do not exist in its budget.
I was always given a lot of love and a lot of attention and just, able to dream big. When I dropped out of high school, my mother didn't question it. She was like, I don't know what the hell you're doing, but you're gonna figure it out because you're bigger than this. You're bigger than just doing whatever it is that you're doing right now. My name is Berner. I'm the founder, CEO of Cookies. Family was very, entrepreneurial. My mom worked for herself. My father worked for themselves, but they worked really hard. We never really had a lot of money, so we just had just enough. We had a good upbringing, and I think I got my work ethic from my father and from my mother. They always worked really hard, and they worked for themselves, and they always told me, when you grow up, work for yourself. You don't want a boss. Cookies was birthed, it was a combination of music, the internet, and cannabis in the medical days. What I pride myself most on is not only that Cookies is a globally recognized brand or an incredible menu that people enjoy, but it's really also a platform too. So the backstory of Cookies is simple. It was like the .com era for weed, and everything just magically happened on its own, organically as hell. So if you go into a cookie store, it's, maybe 30-40% of our product, and the rest is other people's brands. And so when we're driving traffic to stores and we're bringing celebrities to stores and people are hitting me up that are my friends that are, have big reaches and big platforms, and they come in there, they see other brands, they pick it up as naturally promoting those brands. So we're a platform. We like to share everything we got. We want to see more minorities and more people from the game in the game. I think people really appreciate the backstory of Cookies, kind of like the underdog story. And people know I've been doing this for 20 years legally. I've always been the weed man. From 18 to now, I've always been the guy with some of the best herb. And I think that's what people might not know, is that behind the scenes, I've been doing this for a very long time. I think that's what really keeps us as a standout brand. Our dedication to our menus, to our store experience, the customer journey, and just the actual reputation we have in the weed business as authentic players. I love people. I really get off on connecting with people, and one of the things I always say about what I love most about what I do is that this right here actually brings people together. No matter where you are, no matter the age difference, the religious belief, whether Republican, Democrat, old, young, it doesn't matter. People can bond over this plant, and I brought a lot of people together that wouldn't have came together otherwise, right? So I love that it connects people, and look at what I do for a living: music, cannabis. I like to be in the mix. I love people, and I think that's what kind of made me successful, to be honest with you. Yeah, music, same thing with cannabis. I was a fan of it, and I feel like when you're a fan of something and you put your heart into it and you're passionate about it, you're gonna win. To date, I have about 46 albums out. I've done everything myself, all independent. I love to make music, but I start off as a fan and wanting to put certain artists on certain beats, and kind of learned how to rap through my albums and just never stopped, A lot of hurdles through the way. Music is a tough industry, and the cool thing is, being an independent artist, there's no pressure with radio and industry politics with labels. I'm able to do whatever the hell I want to do, when I want to do it, how I want to do it, and it's worked great for me. And I think it's also complemented the cannabis side of our business a lot too. They have to be intertwined because one hand washes the other. I'm able to connect with people through the herb, we're able to connect on music, but really it's a really good way to market what we're doing, right? Especially with censorship on social media and cannabis not being accepted everywhere. Maybe when you're depressed, you turn on a certain type of music, or you're happy, you celebrate, you turn on music. Same thing with cannabis. People use it to get through all different kind of things. It plays a part in people's days, so that's why they go hand in hand. Music is like a journal for me. It's like a diary. So what inspires my music is like real life, like what's happening right now. Both music and cannabis give me purpose. You know, I just got out of a stage 3 cancer battle, and the first thing I did when I found out I got cancer was came to this room right here and recorded the Gotti album. The first thing I did when I found out that I was negative of cancer after chemo, when I wasn't supposed to be on my feet, was came right back here, recorded 23 songs in 12 days. And so, you know, what they do for me is it brings me purpose. For me, legacy is something that outlives yourself. Maybe it outlives your family. And so that's always been my goal. It's not really about money for me. And if you could reach the world and touch the world from wherever you're at, and then you could last after you go, that's all I want. I definitely want to outlive myself. That's legacy.
The DeLorean is back with an 88-unit Alpha 5 EV concept. People who couldn't tell a Corvette from a Civic can typically immediately spot a DeLorean. Workers in Northern Ireland produced just short of 9,000 of the V6-powered stainless steel-shelled rear-engine coupes from 1980 to 1982, before DeLorean Motor Company, or DMC, collapsed under debt and alleged drug dealing by its desperate namesake John DeLorean, who was found not guilty of the charges against him in 1984. But by then, DeLorean was done. Not many cars have the emotional pull of a DeLorean. The future is so bright 1980s automotive icon that was cemented into pop culture like few other cars after a star turn as a rolling time machine in the 1985 mega-hit movie Back to the Future, and the sudden and swift demise of the company and the man who created it. Now, 40 years on, it appears to be back. John DeLorean passed away in 2005 at the age of 80, but 10 years before his death, the remains of the company were bought up by an Irishman who had grand designs on resurrecting the cars in their original form, but it was not to be. Now, the brand has moved to the US, under the supervision of Joost de Vries, formerly of Tesla and Fisker Karma, and he's got plans not just to revive the hallowed name and the signature car, but to expand and grow DeLorean into a contender in both the EV and gas-powered market segments. First up will be the new DeLorean, known as the Alpha 5, which will be a limited production, high-performance, all-electric 4-seat sports coupe, much like the original, save the electric part. The car was recently announced and renders revealed. DeLorean says a physical specimen will debut in August at Pebble Beach, with production slated for 2024. De Vries told Autocar that he hopes to take DeLorean public at about the same time the first car gets shown later this year. Only 88 initial EV units are planned. You likely know why that number is key if you saw the movie. In Back to the Future, the flux capacitor-powered DeLorean has to hit 88 miles per hour before it can launch into time travel mode. The new DeLorean EV is designed by Giorgetto Giugiaro, who also came up with the original DMC-12, as the 1980s car was officially known. Giugiaro is now the head of design firm Ital Design. The EVs will be built in Italy, according to CEO De Vries, with some powertrain input from companies in the UK. Oddly, the first 88 cars will be tied to NFTs in some form, and will not be street legal, despite performance numbers that will include a 150 mile/hour top speed, 0 to 60 in under 3.5 seconds, and over 300 miles of range from a 100 kilowatt battery pack. Cars built after the initial 88 units will be street legal. If funding and construction plans reach fruition, the EV will be followed by several other DeLorean models, including a V8-powered sports car and a hydrogen-powered SUV, among others. But for now, the upcoming DeLorean EV is looking to the future while paying homage to the past. Gull-wing doors, rear louvers, and the iconic metallic finish. There's no word yet on if it will include a flux capacitor. As Sam Bankman-Fried's crypto empire has crumbled all around him, it's safe to say there were red flags all over the place, but we missed them. FTX was a success story almost too good to resist. In just over 3 years, it went from nothing to a $32 billion company. And along the way, journalists, investors, politicians, regulators all dropped the ball. One of the biggest red flags to FTX's demise came from Sam Bankman-Fried, or SBF, himself, during a talk with David Rubenstein, one of the founders of the Carlyle Group and a TV host on Bloomberg. SBF explained his reason for creating FTX came from frustrations he was experiencing at Alameda Research, his crypto-focused proprietary trading firm. Alameda was making lots of money, but had the potential to make more. It was just that venture capital wasn't lining up to give cash to traders in their 20s, regardless of their purported 100% annualized returns. So Alameda relied on putting together lines of credit to build its capital base. By creating his own exchange in FTX, SBF could create a platform tailored to Alameda's trading needs and tick all the boxes for attracting VC money. Now that SBF had an exchange, VC money started coming in. But there was an obvious issue with this approach. Alameda, a proprietary trading firm, would now be under the same leadership as an exchange open to the public. Whether it was planned from the start or a last-ditch effort when things got tough, this structure allowed FTX to be used as a cash cow to keep Alameda afloat. Another red flag came from an appearance in April on Bloomberg's Odd Lots podcast, when Bankman-Fried explained how value could be created from nothing using tokens. What he described was a process similar to what we now suspect FTX and Alameda were doing. FTX's token, FTT, was being propped up by Alameda, and Alameda was allegedly using the token as collateral to fund its own trading activities. Borrowing money to trade has the potential to amplify gains, but it can also lead to devastating losses. While all the details have yet to emerge, it appears so far that Alameda's tactic of borrowing to trade contributed to its demise. Investors who handed over hundreds of millions to FTX might have been mesmerized by SBF's vision, but they were not kept in check by regulators or the media. SBF was a mainstay on podcasts and conferences, a fixture on magazine covers including Forbes, and was very easy for reporters to reach, even on deadline. He also opened up his life to the biggest name in financial journalism. Michael Lewis, the author of The Big Short, was reportedly following SBF around for his latest book. Along the way, few questions were asked about how the company grew so fast, and the cozy relationship built between Bankman-Fried and FTX with reporters may have prevented closer scrutiny. In one particular bizarre incident, Brett Harrison, who was the president of FTX's US crypto exchange, left the company in late September without providing a reason. But instead of asking him why, some journalists decided to shoot a TikTok video with him joking about the situation. Government also had a reason to be chummy with FTX. SBF donated nearly $40 million to candidates during the midterms, testified to Congress on a number of subjects including regulating crypto markets, and the records show he personally met with SEC Chairman Gary Gensler. CFTC Commissioner Caroline Pham also deleted a photo of her and SBF together, posted on her Twitter page. But there were some trying to sound the alarm before everything came crashing down. Orthogonal Credit, a former lender to Alameda Research, said it severed its relationship with Alameda earlier this year. In a due diligence on Alameda, Orthogonal pointed out the company had declining asset quality, unclear capital policy, less than robust operational and business practices, and an increasingly Byzantine corporate structure. Mark Cahodes, the perennial short seller known for pointing out market frauds, put it in even simpler terms. In my view, nothing ever added up. I think SBF will make Bernie Madoff look like Jesus Christ.
I don't think I give a shit about my legacy. That's not what matters. In the end, it's the mark that we actually leave on the world, not the mark we're perceived to leave on the world, that matters.
In an industry known for speed and scalability, it seems fitting one of the world's largest cryptocurrency exchanges imploded within days. The rise and fall of FTX revealed holes in the crypto space that industry peers, the media, and government officials either chose to overlook or refuse to question. Beneath the promise of a decentralized financial future for the world stood a fragile ecosystem pioneered by young, ambitious founders determined to move mountains under the guise of effective altruism, a trendy philanthropy movement among tech founders. FTX's fallout wasn't the only concerning news out of the crypto industry in 2022. It follows the decimation of Lunacoin and the Voyager scandal, which leaves us wondering, can the public and government legislators trust the crypto system?
Back in 2017, the crypto world was riding a pretty chaotic wave at that time. That was during what was known as the ICO boom, or initial coin offering, where if you had an idea for a blockchain project, you wouldn't necessarily go to Silicon Valley venture capitalists on Sand Hill Road. You could actually just put out a white paper, create a wallet, sell tokens to investors, and people were able to raise tens of millions, sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars in a very quick amount of time. However, in 2018, the crypto market subsequently crashed. Bitcoin fell to under $4,000. There was a real fear that the market was going to completely bottom out. I remember some crypto folks just continuing to buy because either they felt that they were going to go down with the ship, or if Bitcoin and crypto recovered, they were getting the deal of the century. What really turbocharged all of this was the pandemic, and more particularly the response from the US Federal Reserve, its central bank, and central banks around the world that injected trillions of dollars in liquidity into the global economy to help people make ends meet, until August of 2020, when Michael Saylor, the ex-CEO of MicroStrategy, made a $250 million purchase of Bitcoin for his company's balance sheet, making it the primary treasury reserve asset. It turned out to be the beginning of what was a major influx in institutional capital into Bitcoin. That led to a tsunami of interest, not just because, okay, look, here are these big publicly traded companies that are interested in the asset, but by this point, everybody was flush with cash.
It was around this time that crypto latecomer Sam Bankman-Fried started to make headlines.
He launched a quantitative trading firm called Alameda Research and found a way to exploit price differences in Bitcoin in different parts of the world to make a sizable fortune. In particular, he bought them cheaply in the United States and was able to sell them in Japan for up to 30% more. He did that for a couple of years, and then he ended up rolling some of those profits, as well as taking on some new investors to create his exchange FTX. One of his investors was Changpeng Zhao, the founder and CEO of Binance, which is the largest crypto exchange in the world.
FTX focused on a particular type of trade called derivatives, which are used as a hedging tool to help traders and people manage risk. FTX stands for Futures Exchange, and it was built specifically to handle those types of trades.
FTX was a pretty good product. People liked it. It was advertised as by traders for traders, and institutions trusted it. They, at some point, actually had a lot of money. Although looking at the balance sheet that came up, looks like a large portion of it was coins that they themselves effectively created.
Those coins created by FTX, which ultimately contributed to the company's downfall, were known as FTT.
FTT belongs to this weird class of cryptocurrencies that are created by exchanges, and you can think of them as loyalty points because they give users all these perks on exchanges like discounts and trades. FTT is kind of a utility token. It doesn't represent an ownership stake in FTX, but in a certain way it is similar to a stock because it is associated with a company.
When FTT tokens first hit the market, they were performing well.
FTX itself was established in this weird time in 2019 when kind of the big bear market almost ended, and FTX hasn't really experienced any of the big drawdowns that other exchanges saw before. It was a latecomer. So FTT was also just going up. I think it was worth over $20 at some point.
It appears that FTX and Alameda were using FTT, the token that FTX created, as one of the largest assets in their balance sheets, and were allegedly loaning money against it.
There's lots of questions about the intrinsic value of Bitcoin, Ethereum, other tokens out there. Many people that don't follow the industry closely will say it's just a bunch of digits on a piece of paper. What's backing it? The question about intrinsic value for tokens like FTT and BNB and CRO and so on and so forth is even murkier. Essentially, the intrinsic value is just based on different types of benefits and privileges that you get for using an exchange, like trading discounts or increased rewards for if you lend your tokens on the platform. The problem, though, is a lot of these tokens trade on exchanges around the world, and people buy them as a proxy for owning stock in those companies. Many people bought FTT because they kind of felt that directionally it was going to be closely correlated with the fortunes of FTX.
FTT had the trust of traders and investors alike, and buy-in for the token was making Sam Bankman-Fried and others incredibly wealthy.
Our cover story was really the first big profile of Sam Bankman-Fried in a magazine, and it really looked at sort of his background and how in a very rapid period of time he became the richest 29-year-old in the world. At the time that we did the story, I think we had him valued at $22.5 billion, although a lot of it was illiquid, locked up in FTT tokens that played a role in the downfall of all this, and FTX equity. A lot of people are asking, why did nobody realize this sooner? I will say that there were certain warning signs there. I mean, for one, the ties between FTX and Alameda were largely known. The first time we even looked at Sam Bankman-Fried's wealth, he shared a spreadsheet with us breaking down his token holdings and the various assets that he had. It was in pretty non-traditional and somewhat illiquid tokens.
FTX appeared to be a very profitable company.
FTX only has about 300 employees. Payroll is typically the highest expense that an exchange has. The overhead is basically a software company. The overhead's very, 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 very low. So all of those things combined, plus the fact that subsequently he started raising money at massive valuations all the way up to $32 billion from some of the most esteemed investors in the world, the Sequoias, the SoftBanks, the Tiger Globals, etc. For all intents and purposes, he was a multi-billionaire.
If the events in question were happening at the time of Forbes' cover story, it's possible that they were hidden by the bull market. But on November 2nd, 2022, FTX's facade was shattered in a matter of hours. Alameda Research, FTX's sister quantitative trading firm, had large holdings of FTT, which it used as leverage to make risky, speculative bets on other cryptocurrencies and complex financial products. It also became clear that Sam Bankman-Fried might be using customer funds through FTX to help keep Alameda Research afloat. As long as the price of FTT remained stable without a rush of FTX customer withdrawals, the whole operation could appear solid.
CoinDesk published a copy of Alameda's balance sheet, which showed that a lot of its assets were in FTT, which is kind of an exchange token used to get discounts and stuff on FTX that is pretty illiquid. And when that happened, that caused a lot of people to get scared. The real catalyst for all of this is when, shortly after CoinDesk published that article, Changpeng Zhao, CZ, announced that he was going to sell about $500 million of FTT on the open market. This automatically created a lot of fear and doubt among FTT holders.
After CZ decided to offload his exchange's FTT holdings, investors pulled out en masse, which tanked FTT's worth and Sam Bankman-Fried's operation. In 24 hours, the coin went from around $22 to under $5, wiping out more than $2 billion in value.
Ultimately, what happened was Sam Bankman-Fried reached out to CZ, his earliest investor, to see if Binance would be interested in acquiring FTX. Binance and FTX signed a letter of intent, but it was non-binding. About 24 hours after that letter was signed, CZ and Binance announced that they were going to walk away from the deal, that there were too many problems at FTX, and then eventually the company decided to file for bankruptcy, Chapter 11. Bankman-Fried stepped down as CEO, and now once again the industry is trying to deal with the fallout of that, and now we're also trying to understand the subsequent collateral damage that's coming from this bankruptcy, because Three Arrows Capital was seen as sort of at the hub of major trading desks and firms around the world. FTX was orders of magnitude bigger.
So how did no one realize earlier that the math behind FTT was suspicious?
There's a lot of finger pointing here. Who was responsible? The media, the investors, and politicians. Media definitely has a responsibility. We do. What was, I think, very interesting about Sam is that compared to other crypto billionaires, he was very friendly, talkative, open. He was always somewhere giving speeches, giving interviews. He was easily accessible any time of day and night. He gave information that no other crypto billionaire or executive of his scale gave, which in hindsight is also a red flag.
Gary Gensler, who is the head of the Securities and Exchange Commission in the US, is also in an awkward position.
This is the chief financial cop. FTX was getting away with what it was doing right under his nose. Gary Gensler has taken a very forceful stance on crypto since entering his position under the Biden administration. He's made it a priority to crack down on fraudulent coin offerings. Just last month, he had a very high publicity charge of Kim Kardashian over promoting the Ethereum Max coin. It seems that some of these smaller fish were distracting his attention from the big fish, which of course was FTX.
I think there's still a lot of uncertainty because technically FTX International was based in the Bahamas. There was also FTX US, which was based in the US. A couple years ago, the Bahamas passed a digital assets-focused legislation that let exchanges like FTX to domicile in the islands. It wouldn't be right to say that FTX wasn't regulated. It was regulated by the Bahamian authorities, but I think the questions that everyone will be asking now is, well, what kind of oversight they had. Now there are reports that some employees or people who worked with Sam on other projects tried to raise those issues, but they were quickly shut down because of the influence that he commanded, because the industry is so small. There's a discussion about making it a requirement for exchanges to come up with proof of reserves, which is basically a way to prove cryptographically that centralized entity has enough assets against the liabilities. CZ, the CEO of Binance, the company at the center of this whole thing, came out and said, I haven't been too vocal about issues that I saw, but maybe I should start doing it.
Many people took it at face value that there was enough of a separation of duties between FTX and Alameda or Gap that no major conflicts of interest would actually arise. Obviously, that does not necessarily seem to be the case. The biggest trigger for what happened, and this is all still being reported out, so no one really knows for sure exactly what happened, but it appears that the Alameda was a victim of the fallout that stemmed from earlier volatility this year when the Terra USD and Luna ecosystem, $55 billion for essentially a stable coin, completely got wiped out. That led also to the fall of 3 Arrows Capital, a multi-billion-dollar hedge fund based out in Singapore, bankruptcies of a crypto broker, Voyager, that traded on the Toronto Stock Exchange, and a lender called Celsius. People always wondered, okay, is that the collateral damage? Is that the extent of this? But crypto is such an integrated industry, and despite its decentralized and open and transparent nature, it is pretty obfuscated. It appears that Alameda was part of that. And the real cause of the downfall was that Alameda was getting margin called, which means that it had taken out leverage positions and had to post more collateral when those positions became less valuable, and they needed additional assets and collateral. FTX, despite user policies saying that they would explicitly not do this, gave customer deposits to Alameda. Sam Bankman-Fried claims that he did not realize that was what was going on, but that does seem to be what happened.
Another driving force to FTX's ruse that may have warded off closer scrutiny was Sam Bankman-Fried's philanthropic ethos. Bankman-Fried regularly spoke of effective altruism, an academic and social movement geared around maximizing the most good for the world.
At a high level, you cannot understand the rise of Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX without taking into account his focus on philanthropy and his profession of effective altruism.
I got into finance in the first place to try and maximize the amount that I can donate to some of the most effective causes. And I'd certainly love to be spending more time thinking directly about what these projects can be working on. But my main role right now is to do what I can to help support them financially or any other way that I can.
Sam Bankman-Fried's giving and his talking about his giving was core to the image that he presented on Capitol Hill, in the press, with celebrities, with the broader public. Philanthropy made Sam Bankman-Fried unlike any other crypto entrepreneur we've seen before. This was not somebody who cared about decentralization or those core tenets of the crypto movement. This was somebody, a self-professed capitalist for the purpose of giving it all away. Effective altruism received a lot of money and a lot of press from FTX, while FTX gained the reputational advantage of being this group of philanthropists and givers, and that's what made them stand out in crypto. And I think it brought them a level of mainstream acceptability and cachet that other crypto companies haven't seen to date. Sam Bankman-Fried's donations to Democrats do leave them in a bit of an awkward position. He was one of the biggest givers during this last election cycle, and there have already been calls for candidates and politicians to give those funds back. That being said, Republicans also received a lot of money from FTX. Ryan Salam, one of FTX's executives, gave about $24 million to Republican candidates. I think the really interesting question is, for charities that did receive money from the FTX Foundation, will they get to keep that money, or will they have to give it back through bankruptcy court? Restructuring experts I've spoken to said there is a chance that they're going to have to give that money back. So it really depends on whether it's determined that the philanthropy of FTX was part of the broader scheme to allegedly defraud customers of their funds. And if that's the case, then those secondary transactions, the money that went from the FTX Foundation to charities, that could be clawed back.
FTX's ripple of destruction is still unfolding, but the damage to the larger industry could be everlasting.
I think the big worry for everyone, especially within the industry, is that regulators will take away wrong lessons from this situation, that they will come in and start regulating even more when there is not enough clarity. It's important to understand that it's precisely lack of clarity and uncertainty that drove a lot of companies, including FTX, offshore, where they could set up shop in jurisdictions where the rules weren't as strict, or where they could buddy up with regulators better.
One of the real messages that's going out day and night from crypto entrepreneurs and executives that remain is that people really need to think carefully about where they hold their tokens and how they secure their assets. Because if there's one thing to know, it's that if you see a balance on an app or a computer screen, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's there. And that you really need to make sure that wherever you store your tokens, if you store them with someone else, that they have good risk management processes in place, they have been audited, and that they don't necessarily engage in potentially risky behaviors like lending and trading, or at least don't do so without proper consent from the customer.
Another thing to be said here is that FTX didn't really have a real board of directors. There's a meme where everyone stands in a circle pointing at each other, you did due diligence and you did due diligence. So who actually had a look into what was happening early on and was able to say, oh, here's something weird? Everyone wanted to believe in Sam, just like in Elizabeth Holmes and many other similar cases. We are yet to see what will happen with Sam Bankman-Fried and Alameda, but this is what the industry is looking at.